Yeah.
Or cry over this last week.
Right.
I'd like to call to order the Avalon City
Yeah.
Council
It's
meeting
definitely
of
been,
Tuesday, March
trial by
2nd.
all the
Okay, I'm on
things.
now.
Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Okay.
And begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm happy to announce that...
Is Michael in the...
Yes, Michael's here with me. Okay. Happy to announce that the last 2 weeks...
Denise, we can barely hear you like last week.
What?
We can barely hear you.
Okay.
Oh, that's better, Mayor.
Okay. Anyway, fortunately, we have not had any of our residents pass away in the last couple of weeks. That's great news. But as we all know, we have a number of friends and family members that might be in poor health, and we wish them well. Please be seated. Okay, may we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember De La Rosa,
Here?
Councilmember Lavelle,
Here.
Councilmember Ponce,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cindy Cassidy,
Here.
Mayor Marshall.
Here. And I see we have Scott Campbell,
Oh, sorry.
our city attorney, on there. And we have a presentation now, which will be made by Eric O'Donnell from Townsend, and he'll provide an update on new and pending legislation.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. Eric O'Donnell with Townsend Public Affairs. Appreciate the opportunity tonight to present to you. I know it's been a while since I've been in front of you, and unfortunately it's virtual. I always love the trip to the island, but I want to congratulate all of the new council members who I've yet to meet. Looking forward to working together. We're the city's legislative advocates in Sacramento and DC, as well as grant writers. So tonight I'll be giving you a brief presentation about what we've been working on, what to expect out of Sacramento and DC this year. Do you have the presentation in front of you, Matt? Are you broadcasting it through the
Yes,
Zoom?
he's saying yes.
Okay, can the council see the presentation as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, we can just start at the second slide. Next slide's fine. Quick agenda, we're going to go over the city's legislative platform that's going to be on the agenda later tonight for adoption. I'll just give a brief introduction about what that's used for, kind of the process for that. Then we'll move on to what is happening timeline-wise in the legislature in Sacramento, schedules, and what to expect on the calendar. Do a brief recap of the governor's January budget proposal that was announced earlier this year, go into some specific legislation, and finish off with some federal funding opportunities. So the next slide on the legislative platform. Next slide, Matt, please. Perfect. So the purpose of the platform, if this is your first platform, we've been doing this for several years now with the city. Every year we go back and refresh, kind of, see what needs to be updated based on the previous legislative session. What did we learn? What did we see? But the purpose of the platform is to really establish the city's priorities in policymaking in Sacramento and DC. Establish what the city is all about. That's for both you as council members, for when you are serving the city outside of the chambers in terms of regional state boards, committees, commissions, if you go into the mainland for committee meetings, whatever it may be, that's for your purpose, to know what the city stands about and have a document that you can have in front of you at all times, to have that legislative backup. But it's also for your elected officials and for the residents of the community and for anyone else working with the city to know legislatively what you guys are all about and really know what they can count on for the city of Avalon in terms of legislative positions and legislative policies. So next slide, please. We break it down. We've done several platforms for several cities throughout the state. How we break it down at Townsend is we usually have a guiding principles section, and then a policy statement section. So the guiding principles really is the umbrella that overarches the rest of the policy statements. So the guiding principles that we generally like to promote and to include are the first three here: the preserve local control, promote fiscal responsibility, and support funding opportunities. Those are the three that we like to do. In the case of Avalon, we're excited to work with staff and come up with additional ones for your case that are super specific to Avalon, and they can really help you guys grow and mature legislatively in Sacramento and DC. Encourage geographical considerations is wildly important. As you know, being where you are located, you do get left out on a lot of things. You do get overlooked in legislative policies and legislative principles in Sacramento and DC. And our purpose is to curtail that, is to be involved in those conversations, to make sure you're not forgotten, to make sure that those considerations are included in legislative policy making in Sacramento and DC. And then partnerships and collaborations, the city enjoys a ton of partnerships and collaborations that really do enhance the services you can provide your residents. So we did want to make sure that that was included as part of our guiding principles of the document. So everything else under in the policy statement section really kind of goes back to this guiding principles and can relate back to either preserving local control or one of those 5 guiding principles. Next slide, please. In terms of the legislative calendar in Sacramento, we are in the first year of a brand new 2-year legislative session. So Sacramento does 2-year legislative sessions. So if something dies in the first year, it's still alive the next year. It's not actually dead and done until it's been 2 years. So this is the first year of a 2-year legislative session. All the bills that are introduced are brand new bills, have not been seen before in terms of the bill number. The content might be the same as a previous bill, but the bill numbers have to restart in the first year. So it's looking like increasingly, as I'm talking to legislative staffers and senators and assembly members, it's looking like the rest of the year is going to be sort of a hybrid in-person virtual model, much like we saw in 2020 in the legislature. So what that means is the Capitol is really limiting the amount of people that can go in at a time. The public is still not allowed in the Capitol. Only one staffer per member is allowed in the Capitol at a time. No lobbyists, no advocates, no one else is allowed in. So the halls are pretty quiet, as you can imagine right now. The Capitol, if you've ever been, is always busy 24/7 from when it opens to when it closes. But right now it's kind of a ghost town. So a lot of legislators are opting to do a virtual call-in or Zoom-in model, just like we're doing right now, for committees and for floor hearings. But as you can imagine, that severely slows down the process quite a bit. On Friday of last week was the bill introduction deadline. All bills have to be introduced by that February 19th deadline. There were about 2,400 bills that were introduced in total in California only. That sounds like a lot because it is a lot. But a couple of things I will say, it's not as much as it was in previous years of a first year session. It's almost 200 roughly bills less than what was introduced in 2019, the other first year of a 2-year session. That might be on account of coronavirus and what legislators are seeing in terms of trying to tighten up their bill packages. But roughly a third of those bills are what we call spot bills or intent bills. So they're not bills that have any substantive language attached to them. They're bills that declare the legislature is going to do X in the future, or declare that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, but no actual legislative language that has any substance. So those bills will have to be amended before their first policy committee hearing, probably in the next 2 months, in order for them to continue throughout the process. But like I said before, anything that dies this year is still going to be alive starting again next year. You kind of have to wait that full 2 cycles for those issues to be completely restarted and done. As for COVID-19 restrictions, kind of going back to it a little bit, the Senate has waived their 30-day constitutional requirement for bills once they're introduced to be heard in policy committee. So typically a bill gets introduced, you have to wait 30 days for the public and everyone else to comment on it before it can be heard in committee. The Senate has waived that rule constitutionally with a majority vote because they only have 2 committee rooms in the Senate, on the Senate side of the building, that they have deemed to be eligible for COVID-19 restrictions when it comes to physical distancing and all of the technological requirements required for a virtual committee hearing. So there's only 2 rooms left out of dozens. So they have to get all of those bills done in those 2 rooms over the next several weeks. So they can't wait 30 days at the beginning for those bills. So the Senate has waived it. The Assembly is still moving on as is. We're also hearing that the Assembly members can only take 12 bills over with them to the second house when they do switch houses. They have a 20 bills that they get to introduce every year in the assembly, but they can only take 12 with them. So further limiting the number of bills that might be introduced this year because of the COVID-19 restrictions. This process will continue all the way through September 10th when the legislature has to pass any bill, and then the governor has 30 days after that to sign or veto any legislation. Next slide, please. So what the legislature is going to be working on this year, 2,400 bills, lots of policy topics, as you can imagine, lots of different topics. COVID-19 is going to be the real focus this year. Everything else is going to have to come second to COVID-19. They're hyper-focused on COVID-19 response, vaccine distribution, even getting schools back open, as you saw yesterday and the day before. So COVID-19 response is going to be the overarching goal of the legislature, followed closely by the rest of these in no particular order. As you know, last year was the worst or the most destructive wildfire season on record in California due to climate change, kind of a hybrid priority there. They are going to be focused heavily on wildfire prevention, whether it's through the budget, through one-time surplus, through bond funding even. So we do expect to see a lot of legislation and funding going that wildfire route. Broadband infrastructure is an interesting one that came up this year that comes up every couple years. A big push right now in both the Assembly and the Senate for broadband infrastructure statewide on communities that do not have access to broadband infrastructure. I know that that's a major priority for the city, but I've been working with city staff on that for a couple of years now. So definitely something that we're interfacing with those authors' offices to see where there could be synergies between the city of Avalon and any other efforts statewide on broadband infrastructure. Public safety and social justice, a couple other things that go hand in hand. We saw last year with all the civil unrest nationwide, a lot of public safety and social justice bills introduced in the Assembly and the Senate due to some last minute politicking and bickering, you might as well call it. Those did not get passed at the end of the year, and so those are and will be reintroduced this year, and expect that to be another issue that they're going to have to tighten up. And then housing, of course, in California, I don't see housing going anywhere in terms of a priority legislatively. That's going to continue to be a focus of the legislature as California continues to suffer from a supply crisis. Next slide, please. So the governor did start his January budget, or did release, I should say, his January budget on January 8th this year. That budget proposes $227.2 billion of total funding that includes the general fund and all special funds. That is a lot of money. That is the biggest budget proposed. Included in that is a $15.5 billion projected budget surplus. That was projected in January using December numbers. We're hearing, we have to yet to be seen. We're hearing that might be closer to 19 billion now. Keeps going up as we're collecting more tax revenues going through the April tax collecting deadline. But that's a big change. Take a minute and rewind last year to this around this time. In April, we projected and ran a $54 billion budget shortfall last year. 54 billion to 19 billion surplus. That's a massive swing for California. That's due largely from collecting revenues higher than expected. A lot of middle class and upper class workers did not get hit as hard in the pandemic as originally thought they were going to. We're still able to work, still able to pay taxes on that. But that budget surplus is one time. That is going to go away next year, unless additional clarifications change on the budget side. But that is a projected one-time surplus. Deficits will be back starting in 2022. That surplus is being used a variety of ways. Like I said, it's being used heavily so far on COVID-19 response, small business loans, opening schools, a lot of money going in to school reopenings and small businesses. Even wildfire has a piece of that one-time budget surplus. So it is kind of being spoken for. But that being said, it's better to run a surplus than it is a deficit, that's for sure, in terms of getting your priorities fulfilled. It does bring us, proposed budget does bring us to about a $22 billion projected reserve for California through our various savings accounts. We have several, brings us closer to that constitutional 10% budget requirement that we have from the rainy day fund, if you remember back in 2014, that was passed by the voters. So it does bring us closer to that 10% mandated savings account.
May I ask a question?
And I will actually say that all of these numbers are very dependent on federal funding. if federal funding does not come through the way that it is expected, this will change and this outlook will change. That surplus might go down a little bit. Those reserves might go down a little bit. But right now, this is the starting point for the administration. Did I hear a question? I'm sorry.
Yes, why would that budget, the 19 billion in reserves, only be a one-time thing? Because if you're paying off all of the COVID debt and you're doing all the, why, and everybody's, I mean, why does that only want a one-time reserve?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you're talking about the surplus. The one-time surplus is just a forecasting tool that the governor's office is using. So they didn't expect this in terms of what they were forecasting before, which means that in their algorithms and their programs, they're not going to expect it in the future. It doesn't mean that there won't be a surplus next year. It just means the way that they're forecasting, they don't expect it. Obviously, they'll take it, but in terms of the conservative financial forecasting that the administration has really inherited from the Brown administration. If you remember, Governor Brown was very fiscally conservative in terms of his projections as well. The Newsom administration is following along that line about their projections and not expecting a surplus.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, we'll finish up the budget with just a timeline of what are we talking about in terms of times. Like I said, it was introduced in January until May. The budget subcommittees really hold hearings on each individual line item almost of the governor's budget, and they go through it line by line. The administration is there to answer questions, almost like a witness in testimony. The legislators on the subcommittees get to ask their clarifying questions and figure out what the governor's office really means by these requests. In mid-May is when a lot of the magic starts in the budget process. The governor releases his May revise. So between January and May, all of that data and tax allocations and collections that happens during tax day on April 15th, all of that gets recorded in the May revise. So all those numbers get updated to be much more accurate than December, January numbers in May. And then from there until June, those subcommittees really start to incorporate their own legislative priorities into the governor's budget. So the legislature will start be more forceful about, hey, we'll grant you this if you grant us that. Let's move this up a little bit. It's one of our priorities as well. And then in early June to mid-June, the governor and legislative leaderships finalize a budget. In the last couple of years, we've been pretty lucky that the budget's been finalized well ahead of time. That's not always the case, but you can be sure that the budget's going to be finalized on or before June 15th, which is the constitutional deadline for the legislature to approve the budget. If they do not approve the budget, they do not get paid. So you can almost guarantee they will approve a budget on June 15th. And then July 1 is the start of the the state fiscal year, and that's when most of the funding will go into effect. Next slide, please. Specific legislation, I want to go into it a little bit. The city has supported this bill, wanted to kind of present it and make sure that everyone understands it. AB 78 by Assemblymember O'Donnell, which is the assembly member who does represent your area, would add Santa Catalina Island into the RMC. So what the RMC is, the San Gabriel and Lower Los Angeles Rivers Mountains Conservancy, is one of the 12 state conservancies that is in charge of conservation and access and use of watersheds and of land in California. So the state's divided into 12 different regions on that. A lot of areas are not included in those 12 regions for whatever reason. This bill would include Avalon and, the entire island and parts of the San Dominguez Channel, the Carson, sort of that area down there into the RMC. So what this does for you is it opens up the entire island to additional funding opportunities for your projects that have to do with habitat conservation, access, trails, anything that's within the mission of the RMC. So we've had several meetings with the city, with the Conservancy, with the Island Company on this. We've gathered some support for it. This is the second or third time this bill has tried to go through. Last year it got stalled because of COVID reasons when all legislators were stopping their bill packages and focusing solely on COVID-19. So we have high hopes for this bill this year to go through. It doesn't appropriate any additional money. It just makes it so that the RMC is eligible to give grants to the island and to the island's entities as well. Usually the RMC gets money through bonds. So Prop 84 had a bunch of money for the RMC. Prop 68 had a bunch of money from the RMC. I believe even Prop 1 had money there. So any sort of bonds that give money to conservancies is pretty common. And then now this would open up the island to those funding opportunities. That is in the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, has not been assigned a hearing date yet, but we will be there to testify and support on behalf of the city. Next slide, please. So as you know, Sacramento has a theme lately of local control, taking away local control from organizations. This bill is one of the several dozen bills that we've been communicating with the city on, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention as it's probably the most understandable and impactful initially. So this bill would require all local agencies to provide either a call-in or internet-based service, whichever one, that includes a closed captioning feature in their virtual model. So it's really focused, the Assemblymember Lee from the Bay Area, first-time Assemblymember, very focused on accessibility for those individuals who are not able to follow along with the council meetings, have some hearing impairedness, would require those closed captioning features. Everything we've heard from most cities, most of our clients, is that this is quite difficult. This is not as easy as it sounds. This is a lot more expensive than people might think it will be. I know very few cities who are already doing this, but the rest of them would have to adapt to this should it pass. So there's a lot of opposition that is already underway from this bill, especially by coalitions. The League, Aqua, CSDA, the whole sort of local agency gamut is gearing up to oppose this as well. They would also require local agencies to translate agendas and instructions into languages that are spoken by 5% of the local agency's jurisdiction. So for Avalon, that might not be as impactful as LA, right, or San Francisco. I mean, we don't know. The bill does not prescribe how many languages that is for all of these, little towns. Even, random rural towns might have more than 4 or 5 languages that are spoken by 5% of the population. That has some considerable costs related to it as well. Still need some clarification from the author's office, but there is a possibility that this does actually require local agencies to have translators on site, on call for these individuals that are trying to make public comment at these meetings, again, for all languages that are spoken by 5% or more. So a lot of question marks surrounding this bill, a lot of clarification still needed. We've heard from the grapevine that the assembly member and his staff, first time, like I said, kind of bit off a little bit more than they can chew here, and we're very surprised by the swift backlash. They are taking amendments. So one of the amendments they will take is they will remove all state agencies from the bill. As written right now, it does require state agencies to follow these guidelines as well. They will remove that section, focus only on the local, and they will take additional amendments on that 5% language, like I said. So I know those amendments are forthcoming. I don't expect them before the end of the week, but it's something we'll definitely keep the city updated on. Next slide, please. SB 9 by Pro Tem Atkins is sort of the highlight of the Pro Tem's housing package that was introduced earlier this year. This is a reintroduction of SB 1120 from last year. So what this bill does, I just wanted to give you kind of a housing bill, kind of give you a flavor of where this local control is coming from in Sacramento. What this bill does is it requires cities and counties to permit either duplexes or an urban lot split on a single family residential zoned parcel. So it's really a double housing bill that would require you guys to have duplexes if developers want where a single family house originally stood. There's a lot of concerns from the league on this bill that combined this with recent ADU housing law, and it's actually 2 parcels and each of them can have an ADU, each of them can have a junior ADU. So now you're at 6, sometimes 8 parcels on a lot, potentially, not mandated, but potentially where there used to only be 1 single family home. So a lot of density concerns there, a lot of zoning and design concerns there. It does have a pretty healthy list of exemptions in terms of where this cannot be used, but just wanted to brief the council on what a flavor of what a local control taking away looks like in Sacramento in the context of housing, trying to get something done on this. So this bill did not pass last year because of some last minute politics at the end of the session, like I mentioned before, but it is back in full force this year. The league is heavily opposed and has a list of amendments that they're trying to include to get it more palatable, but it is alarming to say the least, at least initially. Next slide, please. And then finally, at the federal side of things, we've been working since the pandemic started. Staff and us have been working tirelessly on including state and local funding in any COVID-19 relief package. So a couple times we were successful in getting some PPP loans and FEMA reimbursements in terms of getting those included in the conversation at the federal level. But it was really lacking robust state and local funding to help cities, help counties kind of, recover from the impact of COVID-19 and all of the lost revenue. So as of now, the House has passed a COVID-19 relief package that includes $350 billion for state and local funding. That's great news. That is a number that we are comfortable with and have been happy to help advocate for at the federal level. That's broken down, as you can see here on the slide, $193 billion directly to states, $130 billion directly to local governments, and then the rest to tribal governments or territories. So broken it down in their formula, California gets $26.3 billion of that funding should it pass the Senate in the next couple of weeks. That's a lot of money. That is almost more than 10% of what the state's projected budget would be. So that's an incredible windfall of money that could really add to that one-time surplus and really do a lot of good in California. Unfortunately, the formula is using CDBG allocation methods, which is I'll call it the federal government's favorite way of allocating money because it's already set. They don't have to do any more work. It's already kind of done for them by HUD and through other programs. It's the easiest way to get money out the door. However, it's not always fair. It's not always equitable. And for your case, it's not. The city would receive approximately almost $700,000 out of this. Not a small, chunk of money, understand, but it doesn't fulfill your lost revenues. And it doesn't help backfill all the Harbor Enterprise Fund fees that you're losing as well. So there is a lot more advocacy that can and will be done on this. We've already signed a letter with the mayor advocating that California use that $26.3 billion, and backfill some of those local, small, rural, tourism-dependent economies, and backfill some of that money, to make them more whole, to get it more even with some of those landlocked urban monies that are getting more money because of their dense population. So the good news about this money is, I know the city got some money from the CARES Act before, but that money was not allowed to be used on replacing lost revenue. This money would be. So that $700,000 roughly could be used, on replacing lost revenue. That's a big change in policy on the feds. That's good news. Every city is looking to replace the revenue they've lost. But the fight remains to continue to increase that funding at the federal level, get them to have carve-outs and additional money for small communities, like I said, with tourism impacts, as well as to get California to share some of that $26.3 billion. That has passed the House, and it will be voted on in the Senate in early March. The March 14th is what they're looking at for a deadline right now, because that's when the latest round of unemployment extension ends. So that's their sort of internal deadline on when to get this done. Because this would include additional federal government stimulus rather than just the state and local funding. That's just what we're focusing on. So with that, I know that was a ton of information. I'm happy to take any questions on anything on the PowerPoint or not. And I'll be here for the rest of the meeting to answer any questions on the Ledge platform if there's any as well.
Council members, do you have any questions?
Just one question. This is Lisa. Regarding the CDBG use of distributing funds. It's the second time today actually that I've heard that, literally that it's the way that they have set up. It's already ready to go. It's easy to use. How much of a chance do you think there is of getting them to change that, or at least figure out how to change that, especially when looking at things like the census that, a major part of our population does not live here full time. So even our small population gets limited even further by what that produces.
Right. In terms of chances of changing that for this package, probably not. It's already kind of
10 years.
Yeah. I think with a Democrat, at least for the next 2 years, with a democratically controlled House, Senate, and White House, sort of a uniform approach to this, there could be some additional, call it, extra funding that they might be able to do to backfill now. But I think it's a mentality you kind of have to, it's the squeaky wheel you kind of have to really, keep gnawing on it, that, hey, CDBG formulas are great for, 98% of the nation. They're not great for the other 2% who actually adversely get hit, regressively with that. So let's think of a way, whenever we use CDBG, let's think of a way to add a supplemental attached to it that balances out the playing field, gets it more fair. So we've definitely made those arguments to folks in DC as well as Sacramento. But I think it's one of those things where you got to keep hammering it. You got to keep on with the same message before eventually folks start to take notice.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question. So you gave us the information on AB 339, the closed captioning, and you're saying, well, that's getting some flack and, it is going to be an expensive situation or whatever. But where does or when does the city say yay or nay? Like, Eric, yeah, we want you to push for that closed captioning, or no, we don't want you to push. How do you know to speak for us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I think Michael's probably going to cover in his legislative platform presentation tonight. But the short answer is anything in the platform that's approved by the council is sort of the direction, or the voice of the council about what to go after. That being said, we don't do anything, without consulting staff and without, kind of working hand in hand with staff and take their direction and opinions with us. So, we're not playing cowboy out there with your goals in Sacramento or DC. We're keeping staff informed and with us every step of the way. But the platform is where most of that individual, backup would come from.
Okay.
And just to clarify too, and Eric, you could probably add to this, but the other thing that we do is working with Townsend, city staff monitors the legislative process, and so some of that is just based on timing, and the League of California Cities is really instrumental in helping to mobilize opposition or support for various legislation that's kind of moving its way. So there's opportunities to be very strategic and effective with the timing on when those things get released, as long as it lines up with the legislative platform that council adopted.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Right, and I'll just finish by saying, in March, it's really easy to have those conversations, but when bills are changing, 3 days before the deadline in June or even in September, those conversations, we don't have the luxury of going back to council. We don't have the luxury of, going back to committee. So we do rely on the platform, rely on staff to make those decisions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Council, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, Eric, thank you very much.
Eric, thank you very much, and I just want to make sure everyone knows how appreciative that we are of Townsend, and they offer such an invaluable service to the city of Avalon. They keep us so informed. We're getting daily emails from Eric.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it. I'll stay on for the legislative platform piece as well.
Thank you. Okay, shall we go to announcements and written communications?
I just have a few announcements, and just to remind the public that City Hall hours are from 8 to 12. That's Monday through Thursday, and that is our vehicle hours. And then we close for lunch from 12 to 1, and in the afternoon it's 1 to 5, and that is for commuter subsidy and planning issues. And we are looking at servicing vehicles permits a couple full days, and we will make sure that is advertised properly so the public knows that they can come from 8 to 5. We are halfway through the vehicles, and we have to date put permits on 564, and that's only about a third of our vehicles. So wow. That's where we are at that. And then Eric already covered our letters that we send out to Assemblyman Patrick O'Donnell, and then to Governor Newsom and Ben Allen and Patrick O'Donnell. So we are very appreciative of getting the help for those letters and getting them out. And we are currently drafting letters to the U.S. Senator Feinstein and Padilla, and stating the same and asking to get a bigger piece of the pie instead of using the CDBG formula. And then I do have a written communication to acknowledge for the record, and it's an anonymous letter that the council received from concerned citizens.
Okay, thank you. And I will read a proclamation for the American Red Cross, a proclamation of the City of Avalon proclaiming March 2021 as American Red Cross Awareness Month. Whereas March is American Red Cross Month, a special time to honor the kindness of our neighbors who aid families in need every day across the United States and around the world. Their dedication touches millions of lives each year as they carry out the organization's 140-year mission of preventing and alleviating suffering. And whereas during the trying times of the coronavirus pandemic, people have stepped up to help others in need, whether it was responding to this year's record-breaking disasters across the country or rolling up their sleeves to give blood when our country faced a severe blood shortage. And whereas families have relied on disaster response volunteers for comfort and hope while coping with home fires and other disasters, the American Red Cross, serving Greater Long Beach, South Bay, Metro, and Southeast Los Angeles volunteers, have supported local families in other ways, including supplying local hospitals with blood and convalescent plasma as a treatment for COVID-19. This life-saving work is vital to strengthen our community's resilience. Nearly 200 years since the birth of American Red Cross founder Clara Barton, we dedicate this month of March to all those who continue to advance her noble legacy, and we ask others to join in their commitment to care for people in need. Now, therefore, be resolved that the City Council of the City of Avalon, in recognition of the importance of volunteering your time, making a donation, or giving blood, does hereby proclaim the month of March to be Red Cross Month, and urge all citizens to show their support to the American Red Cross Los Angeles region, dated the 2nd day of March 2021. Annie Marshall, Mayor. Okay. Department head reports.
Good evening, Bob Greenlaw, Director of Public Works. I got 6 items for you. The pump out float replacement. We're full ahead on pump out float replacement request for bids. City staff anticipates that the project will be advertised for bids by next week. Update on the Pebbly Beach Road revetment. Last week we received notice we successfully completed the Army Corps permit process. We've got several other resource agency permits that are underway. And the permit's the last item before bidding the project. It is difficult to determine the exact schedule until the permits are received, but the news from Army Corps, which is a pretty big permit, was positive news. So that's good that hopefully we can move that project forward to construction soon. We got several projects that are smaller projects that staff is doing near the Trailhead building there between Crescent and Pebbly Beach Road, in that little elbow of where the circle is. We've got a valve replacement on Crescent Avenue near the Pancake Cottage. That valve serves the saltwater main from the Catherine Booster Station going up to the reservoir. So it's an essential valve for us. It's very deep, so it'll be similar to the one we did last year. We got the Bauxite feed line rehabilitation, and that line runs along the retaining wall next to the Cartopia there, next to the park. This line feeds the Catherine Booster Station lift station with additives that control grease and odor in the sewer flow. So as we improve that, you should see the odor around town, or at least from that part and into where Pebbly Beach lift station also to be controlled. And then we're also rehabilitating the storm drain right at the corner of Clarissa and Crescent, so out there in Crescent and that was a result of debris being built up during that mud flow that we had in town back at that major storm. It still functions, but we need to dig a hole into that storm drain and get the rest of the debris out of there. So all those projects are happening while we have the equipment in that area here before we get too many more visitors back on the island. We have work happening at the lights along the harbor near the mole, so some of those overhead lights that are into the harbor. We're having major electrical rehabilitation taking place in the conduits and the conductor and the transformer that runs all those lights. They've been corroded over time, so we're pulling all the conductors out, putting a new transformer in, so all of that stuff works. What was happening is we would get some rainwater down in the conduits, and it would start shorting it out, and then you wouldn't see those lights working on float 5, 4, 1, and so it was problematic. So our own staff's doing that. It's great to have John Gilbert, our Public Works Inspector / building official. He's also a licensed electrician. He's our city electrician. Besides, Harbor Maintenance is doing a great job, and they're all working together and getting that done. We got concrete deck repair at the mall, so concrete repairs are being completed on where we have the queuing areas, where we've had that patchwork over the years, and of course, that's all going to be rehabilitated with mall phase 2, but we couldn't allow it to go any further because we would have some trip and fall potential there, so where public works crews are out there taking the top surface where it's spalling and replacing that, so it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a lot better than just the patch job that we've had over the past years. And then the South Beach seawall, so at the last city council meeting, city council approved a resolution for a funding application for departments of boating and waterways for the sand dredging. That funding round is, even if it's successful, that's 2 years out. And so, that's not real good news here, is that it's not going to be soon to get that fixed unless we bring some additional revenue some way, somehow. Hopefully Townsend, of course, maybe there's another source of funding. In the last round of funding with the DBW, there was no funds granted to anybody in the state. So that's where it's at. Hopefully now with some additional funds, as it goes to this budget, they're going to be feeling like they can share some of that, and that we'll see some of the projects within Catalina and, in other locations that are asking for those type of funds for those projects. Any questions?
Questions, council?
Hey, Bob, I have a question. Can you just do a quick couple sentence explanation for the community of what the Pebbly Beach revetment project is?
So we have several phases that we're planning for the future, but the phase 1 project is due to the Hurricane Marie, which was all the way back almost 5 years ago, and there was damage with approximately 26 holes there, and you see those holes still popping up. They look like sinkholes on the side of the road. What has happened, though, is a lot of the smaller rock in the revetment has rolled out and into the ocean. So what we're attempting to do is, to the best of our ability, to get the major portion of those holes fixed with something somewhere south of $900,000. That's what we have in grant funds, OES storm damage funds, that we would fix that project. So what you would see is a contractor come on board, put some big rock in there, and patch those holes up the best we can. In the next stage, what we would be looking for, hopefully with Townsend's help, look for a much bigger funding package, maybe federal or state government, to be able to shore up that revetment to much larger rock so that it can withstand sea level rise, and we wouldn't have this recurring damage.
Perfect, thank you.
Everybody else? Okay, who's next?
Good evening, Captain John Hawking. I would just like to thank the community for working with the Sheriff's Department. We had an incident the other day where there was a motorist that was intoxicated, had several people in a rental golf cart. We received several calls on them driving recklessly, and ultimately they were involved in a collision while the deputies were looking for the golf cart, and the deputies were able to place the suspect in custody for DUI, driving under the influence of alcohol, and nobody was seriously injured. So we really appreciate the work with the community. And that's all I have. Does anybody have anything for me?
Nope, doesn't look like it today. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City staff. I just wanted to advise you that we've finished our application for our Federal Assistance to Firefighter Grant once again this year, and that is to go toward replacing the ladder truck. But I wanted to specifically thank Representative Lowenthal's office and Senator Feinstein's office included letters of support for that in our packet again this year. They've done that before. I just wanted to thank them and their staff for supporting that again. That's all I have to report tonight, unless there's any questions for me.
Well, that's great news. Any questions, council? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the harbor master is saying he doesn't have anything to report unless you all have questions of him. Nope, you're off the hook today, Orrin. Community services? Oh, Matt Baker?
Just real quick, I wanted to provide council and the public with an update for the next couple meetings. Next meeting, we'll have a contractor with HDR come and speak of the cost of service study with regards to our sewer, saltwater, and solid waste. Again, every 5 years, we have a cost of rate study, and there will be a presentation at the next meeting on that subject. And then also the first meeting of April will be our first budget discussion for the next year. So just wanted to make sure everyone has that on their calendars.
Great, thank you. So I'd be curious, so I don't know when we would get that $690,000 or whatever, but when that comes in like that, will you all kind of go, well, this is where we're going to use that $693,000 kind of, Matt, I'm sorry. Or Michael, anybody can answer the question, but. So did you hear my question, kind of?
The gist of it. I think any money that we get, I think the first priority for that would be to put towards reserves. So I think the goal needs to be with this year's coming up budget, particularly with the general fund and the harbor fund, that we are truly not operating on reserves in order to fund operations, but our revenue estimates are sufficient to cover our operations. So it'd be my intent, at least right now, or likely staff's recommendations to any funding that we would get would be so we have some reserves going into the year. So if revenue projections don't meet our estimates, we have some reserve funding. So I don't know if in the April version I will have that in, unless it's already passed the Senate. I try not to count the money until it's in the bank. But I think likely that's going to be, or at least staff's recommendation as far as priority with any funding we receive.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council, the Avalon community. Just a few updates, announcements from the Community Service Department. First, on behalf of the Rotary and the City of Avalon, we'd like to invite you out this weekend for our March Community Cleanup Day. Next weekend. Next weekend. It came up a little quicker. So March 13th, so a week from Saturday, 9 o'clock to about 10:30, across the street at Kids Park. We'd love to have you out. Love to have the families out to join us for that. Secondly, the following day, the 14th, Sunday, we are going to do our third annual Kite Day, Kite Festival at JMF. We will have time slots starting at 12 o'clock. We're going to limit the number of people up on the field at any given time. So you can call 310-510-0220, extension 103, to leave a message or talk to a live person in regards to a time slot for that. So starting at 12, we'll go to about 5 o'clock. We are projecting great winds that day for a great festival. I'd love to have you out. Speaking of JMF, it is great to see, we had the schools contact us last week with some of the restrictions being lifted. We're starting to see the outdoor high school sports come back. So up at JMF, as of this week, we've got girls softball and we've got boys and girls soccer and practices throughout the day. The Recreation Department will probably follow suit here in the next month with a youth sports league, and we're kind of kicking around some ideas for what that'll look like, as well as putting together our spring and summer program lineup. And then lastly, I'm being told that starting in March and then more so in April, we'll start to see some of our vending carts come back, our street vending carts come back. We had some presents last fall with Ben's Pretzel Cart. Then we had the shutdown going into the first year. We haven't seen him back. After a 2-year process, Matt Affolter finally got his approval from the county to do his hot dog cart, and we're starting to get some activity on some merchandise carts. So we anticipate seeing 2 food carts come March, and then certainly in April, and then some street merchandise carts probably in April as well. So we're looking forward to that. And that's it, unless you have any further questions.
Are you still doing the JMF open, was it Friday, Saturdays, or whatever?
So JMF, and yes, thank you for bringing that up. JMF, we are open from 12 to 4. It's supervised open field on Saturdays. At this time, we're still under the restrictions that it's families only, kind of kick a ball around, no pickup games of the like. We took a little bit of heat this past weekend with the schools starting to come back, and we had some soccer activity up there that was not supposed to be up there. So it's still families, 12 to 4, and it's kind of supervised by staff up there to make sure that the protocols are being followed.
Right. And is this Wednesday food pantry or next Wednesday?
It'll be next Wednesday, yes.
Oh, okay.
11 to 1 next Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Great.
Council?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Michael Palmer, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Mayor, can I ask, add one more thing, please?
Oh, please.
That the city clerks have a listserv where they put out a question to all the city clerks, and we heard back from, or I should say, there was an email going around with 37 cities responded as to whether their cities were open to the public during meetings, and of the 37, 7 of them were, but with very strict, limited access. And then also it talked about if the city hall offices were open, and there was only a couple that were offices were actually open to the public coming in. And another question thrown out there was, what were the cities using as far as engaging the public in the city council meeting? And 55 cities responded, and I'm going through all of them to see if there's other ways for us to engage the public.
So we're kind of ahead of the ballgame compared to a lot of them if we're allowing people, number one, to come into City Hall.
For appointments,
And
absolutely.
that kind of thing, and doing this. So this is good. Excellent. Okay. City Attorney, did you have anything? No, that's a no. And-
Nope, I don't. Thank you.
All righty. And did you have anything else, City Manager? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, council reports. Anybody have anything to report?
Well, since I'm here,
Thank you, Michael.
I too wanted to remind people about the cleanup on March 13th, right here on my list, with Rotary in the city. I also will be attending Cal City's LA Division meeting on Thursday. And somebody told me yesterday that they were on the Newport boat, and the Newport boat does not have any restrictions on coming over. Nobody had a mask, people were drinking, so what are our abilities with
After
that?
you told me that yesterday, I confirmed of who I needed to reach out to. I will be calling Mr. Black as well as sending him a letter, and I have his email address.
I did get an answer of the crew were masked up, but they didn't ask anybody, they didn't make an announcement of having to wear a mask. I guess it was a free-for-all on the boat. So that just makes me nervous that they get off that boat, because the announcement wasn't made about having to put a mask on when they got off the boat, so.
Hey, Michael, just to chip in on that one, having a partnership with the Catalina Flyer, they notify everyone via email when they receive their tickets that masks are required. So there may be a disconnect between what they're telling them prior to arrival and when they board the boat, but every single guest that receives a ticket for the Flyer is notified that a mask is required. Just a heads up.
On the boat as well as in Avalon?
Right.
Okay.
But you could always say it so many times, but unless you enforce it.
Right.
Agreed.
Anything
That was all.
Okay. Council, who's next?
I'll go. I attended the Island Connectivity Group meeting, and we have another tomorrow. And also attended on behalf of the mayor, the Metro City Selection Committee for Southeast Long Beach, and Bernardo Dutra was elected for that. And it was a very drama-free meeting. I was expecting more, honestly, but I'm thankful that it was short and non-drama. Also attended the Census Partners Appreciation and Data Resources Preview. They previewed only the self-response rates and not the full response rates, unfortunately. So hopefully we'll have another update at some point soon with the final data for those response rates from the census. But LA County actually was the lowest performing county, which of course also makes sense because of the number of people and access to internet to do that on your own, I think is a little tougher for some in the county, but the numbers were anywhere from 65 to 69 or maybe 70% of the self-completion rate for the census throughout Southern California, throughout the region. So we were fairly in step, but just slightly lower than everybody else. I also attended Infra Day, which was an infrastructure-focused day of discussions and presentations. And in particular, really appreciated, there were a couple of presentations towards the end of the day regarding sea level rise and what other communities throughout Southern California and actually along the California coast are doing. So just had a nice time attending that, and look forward to our discussions regarding sea level rise coming up. And then we are getting Avalon Beautiful kind of rebooted again, thanks to a large part and effort to Dan Hunke's time on the side. So thank you, Dan, for being instrumental in kind of helping to push that moving forward. And hopefully we'll have some updates for you guys soon on some community funding opportunities for projects. And I'm excited to finally be available this coming weekend to attend the community cleanup. So that'll be, next weekend. That'll be fun next weekend. So thanks, that's all I got.
Yesenia?
Yes, I do. I did want to say, first and foremost, happy Women's History Month to all my ladies out there. And saying that the Catalina Island Museum is going to be having an event. They will be celebrating Women of Avalon, past and present. That's going to be March 20th, 11 a.m. via Zoom. So thank you to the museum for doing that. I did also want to thank Dan because he was able to get us another round of gift cards for the community. Again, every single family that I was able to get a gift card to is absolutely grateful. Gets me every time I hand that card over, so thank you so much, Dan. Also, we'll be attending the county telebriefings this week, as well as California Contract Cities local advocacy sessions, and that's all throughout March. And that's going to be it for me.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yep, thanks. Just a couple of quick updates. I'll be attending the Gateway Cities Board and Transportation Committee meetings tomorrow. And also, after the update from Eric O'Donnell today, I'll be watching closely as to whether or not we are included in the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. There is a work group, if you will, that works through the Gateway COG. We have a couple seats actually for the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. So I'll be looking at more information through the COG for that, and possibly putting it out there if a seat does come available this year to see if any of my fellow council members would want to participate in that group as well. So, and that's all I have.
Great, thank you. It's funny because I'm watching your mouth and your words are coming out. Anyway, it's kind of a time lapse thing. It's kind of interesting. We had SCAG meeting on the 4th and, no, when was it? What's today? We had a special meeting last week to approve the final RENA allocations, and that met with much controversy. I think they're the state's requesting that 1.5 million units be built. in the next, I don't know how many years. Of course, our numbers are really low, so Michael Palmer says, don't mess with our numbers. But it was kind of a contentious vote, and they wanted to make sure that, that they're not dealing with economic development. They're saying you have to build these places, but you're really not dealing with the economic development side of this, because you're going to put stuff out in Victorville, but they're still going to have to drive somewhere else to work. And then there's, of course, the rail thing. Then they even talked about student housing, because that's not included, and Riverside has 4 universities or 4 colleges. So what about student housing? So they decided to not go being real controversial, but working on collaboration and all of that stuff going forward. So anyway, but it did pass. And that's all I have to report. So, oral communication. This is an opportunity for the public to address the council on items that are not on the agenda. You will be limited to 2 minutes and no action will be taken. And I see that Captain Hawking doesn't see anybody. Michael, do you have anything?
I do not.
Okay, great. Consent calendar.
We have 5 items this evening on the consent calendar. The first one is minutes from the February 16 regular city council meeting. The second one is warrants for a total disbursement of $1,233,213.62, and that's from the time period of February 8th through February 19. This third one is an annual review of the cruise ship policy. That has been a while since we've talked about cruise ships. Just as a quick reminder, on January 21st of 2020, when everything was going along smoothly, the City Council adopted a resolution establishing those guidelines. Staff was also requested to review the marketing incentive that's in our city ordinance and to engage the Spanish-speaking community in discussions regarding the economic impact of cruise ships and to incorporate their concerns and ideas in any future policies. So we will pick that up once our cruise ship starts coming back. I did note in the staff report that May we had some anticipated ships coming in, but that's no longer the case now, so I'm sure it will be a month by month to, and I'll try to keep the council informed at council meetings as to when we really anticipate a cruise ship coming in. The fourth one is the adoption of the ordinance amending the ADUs, and that was at the City Council last meeting, and it was introduced then, and so we're asking you to adopt the ordinance amending Article 6 of Chapter 5 of Title 9 of the Planning and Zoning, the code to ensure the accessory dwelling units in the Avalon conform with recent state guidance and to provide greater clarity to the public. The fifth one is asking you 2 things, and that's to appoint Councilmember Lisa Lavelle to be listed as an active member of the Los Angeles Orange County Regional Broadband Consortia on behalf of the City of Avalon, and 2, to approve the letters of support for BizFeeds and Los Angeles Digital Equity League consortiums to the California Public Utility Commission for California's Advanced Services Fund grants.
Okay, is there action? Is there anything that you would like to pull?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar if nothing is pulled.
I'll second.
I don't know who we got first, but okay, maybe please have the roll call vote.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Ponce?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Cassidy?
Aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. Item number 6. This is Michael Palmer.
So good evening, Mayor, council members. The item before you is an update. Oh, hold on, sorry. We're just going to load the PowerPoint. So the item before you today is an update to the legislative platform. This kind of dovetails into the legislative policy update that you just received from Townsend Public Affairs. This inaugural platform was developed in 2020, just last year, hard to believe, from the stated and adopted council objectives and priorities. This also included a review of the League of California Cities legislative platform. It reviewed and researched current law and pending legislation and discussions with city council, city staff, and Townsend Public Affairs. So this document is really just a slight revision to what was adopted in 2020. We want to make sure we revisit it every year, one, to just reaffirm council's positions on the stated document. The other part of that is to incorporate any new and emerging trends that are included in on that. As you may have seen earlier, actually as Eric O'Donnell had briefly talked about, there really is three different purposes to this legislative platform. The first one is to establish clear guidance on policy positions. The second one is to provide guidance to council members and staff in terms of what policy platforms and advocacy tools to take. And then the third part of that is to inform positions on policy matters. There's essentially 6 different guiding principles. These guiding principles are the standard ones that Eric O'Donnell, because we use Townsend Public Affairs, that kind of guides a lot of their legislative platforms for many other cities. And we found when we were reviewing it and developing it for the first time that these guiding principles were very appropriate for the city of Avalon. And that includes looking at things like preserving local control, making sure that the city of Avalon continues to have a say over local matters that impact us. This can take the form of many different things, but one of the biggest examples would be things like housing, making sure that the state doesn't erode local control, that we have the ability to say how things are developed here within our community. The second one is promoting fiscal responsibility, followed by supporting funding opportunities, encouraging geographical considerations. We are an island, we're very unique. We're the only city within on an island in California, and so that comes with some very specific characteristics and considerations that we need to educate other legislators about and then take into consideration for policy matters, not just at the local level, but also at the state and the federal level. And then the last one is to enhance partnerships and collaborations. As you've already heard, many of you already sit on a lot of boards, both at the local level as well as the regional and the state level, as does staff, and we need to make sure, one, that we're, as a unit and as a city, all on the same page, and two, we're taking positions that benefit and advance the community as a whole. The way the legislative platform is broken down, there's 8 different priorities areas, and then there's a couple that have some sub-priority areas. These include local government finance, administrative services, community and economic development, sustainability and environment, community services, public safety, public works, and transportation. And these 8 categories pretty much cover the whole gamut of policies in there. There are some nuances and some differences. For this year, though, we did have a couple different revisions that we wanted to make sure, and additions that we wanted to make sure we encapsulated. One of those was looking at the impact of the COVID pandemic on the current city, and we wanted to capture some of those policies as a result of the response into the legislative platform. And so in terms of revisions for that, we added 3 different policy statements to the existing document under local government finance. And this includes supporting legislation that promotes locally designed responses that are funded with flexible response funds to assist in building local public health capacity to combat, control, and respond to communicable diseases such as COVID-19. So we want to make sure that we can design design our responses locally, and we have the flexibility to implement those. The other one is to oppose legislation that reduces funding streams that further erode our ability to protect public health and safety, and that we're supporting direct and federal funding for COVID-19 pandemic relief and economic recovery to local governments, particularly as it relates to rural and isolated agencies to offset lost general and harbor fund revenues. You know, we're very unique in the fact that our harbor fund rivals almost the size of our general fund, and unfortunately, a lot of the funding relief that's coming out, even though we're starting to see the first packages finally address revenue loss, it's in regards to the general fund, and it doesn't have any impact on the city's harbor fund. And so we want to make sure we continue to have statements in there so that we can continue to look and seek out those. The next revision we have is looking at seeking out county, state, and federal funding and permitting support to help comply with unfunded mandates, particularly as it relates to the solid waste realm. There's a lot of legislation that is being implemented this year and in subsequent years. These are mandates in regards to recycling and organics recovery and processing. We are required to comply with them, and unfortunately there's no funding in order to do so. So we want to look at how do we offset some of those costs and seek out funding for that. The next revision that we had was in the realm of communications and technology. This was more of a clarification statement. We already had a goal in there to support efforts to enhance telecommunications, broadband, and infrastructure operations and standards within the city. We wanted to add radio to that, and we also wanted to include supporting the redundancy of public safety communications. So public safety communications is absolutely critical, especially for us as we're on an island and we're totally dependent on others to help provide support for us. And then we also included some language in there to support the legislation that promotes locally designed responses to addressing and involving the impacts of COVID-19 and community health emergencies. The final one that we had in there is a statement that falls under housing and land use. And we wanted, because we know there's a lot of people that are impacted, not just by COVID-19, but just impacted by life in general, and we want to make sure that we support legislation that protects and enhances income, health coverage, food security, and housing stability. Those are kind of the basic tenets of quality of life, and we wanted to make sure that that got clarified in here. It was implied in a lot of different sections, but we wanted to make sure to pull that out. So with that, it's staff's recommendation to adopt the revised legislative platform and include those, and that concludes my report. I'm available for any questions. I also have Eric O'Donnell on, who can also provide some additional clarifications if needed.
I have a question about water supply. So when we don't run our own water utility and we're at the mercy of Southern California Edison, how do we, I mean, yes, we encourage water efficiency standards because we've been in a drought and all of that, but, you know, water reuse technology, water recycling, local water storage, another water supply, does that mean just every time Edison says they might want some of that, we support that, or what else can we do? Because we don't seem to have any real, you know, it's their ball game pretty much. And so how do we, because I know we talked about water reuse before, water recycling and things like that, but if they're not into the ball game and we think that's important, I mean, how does that all work?
So some of this, because this policy document is more of that 50,000 foot level, so what this platform is really doing is enabling city staff and Townsend Public Affairs to look at those opportunities that support a couple of different goals. In regards to water supply, what we have in here is supporting legislation that encourages increasing efficacy, increasing conservation and resiliency. So a lot of what we're dealing with is we don't have a very resilient system yet. Southern California Edison has received some grant funds to develop like that pipeline. That will help to add to the resiliency portion of that. It'll also help to address the current storage situation, but it doesn't really do anything to help enhance and expand out the existing system. And so one of the things that we can do is look for opportunities within the state and the federal funding realm to see if we can align the funding with some of the infrastructure enhancements that are needed in order to increase that. And so we do partner up with Southern California Edison, but the other part of that too is looking at ways that the community, the city itself can support complementary measures in order to help address some of those.
Yeah, great, thank you for that explanation. Okay, council comments? Do you have any, anybody on the, anybody writing to you, Michael, asking questions on this item 6?
I don't have any comments.
Okay. So if there's no...
I just have a couple.
Please,
this is Lisa. The first is just wondering, especially after seeing some of the challenges people had with addresses being accepted during applications for grant funding with COVID-19. And Michael, thank you for talking through this with me earlier today, is if we can look at adding in a line to support funding and legislation that addresses discrepancies in mail routes and delivery, census counts, and other USPS dependent activities. It seems that they're as wonderful of a job that Margarita and her team always do, and we're so appreciative for them. There are systemic things outside of their control that seem to often cause hangups or delays or even potential loss of revenue due to not being able to get delivered a census mailing because the mail route isn't part of the U.S. Postal Delivery Service. So trying to address that, I think is something that we should be looking at and trying to resolve. And then the other one, just to spell out if possible, I know Eric had mentioned during the intro presentation, is to make it a point of whenever there are modified CDBG offerings for funding that we advocate strongly for supplemental payments to be made for those that don't benefit from a CDBG funding type source, so that that becomes the norm in advocacy as opposed to the exception.
Yeah, that 2% that he was talking about. Is there a way to kind of include those in a general statement or something?
Absolutely. We can make if you want to adopt it and then include those 2 revisions, staff would be more than happy to make those and then post that up on the city's website for distribution.
Is that good, Lisa? Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the City of Avalon's legislative platform for 2021 that guides the city's support of or opposition to regional, state, and federal legislation, and authorize city staff to contact state and federal representatives to advocate for legislative proposals consistent with the guidance principles and policy statements outlined within the 2021 legislative platform, including the 2 revisions that were just added on.
Nicely put.
I'll second.
Oh, go ahead. Lisa seconded it. Okay, roll call, please, Denise.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Ponce?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Cassidy?
Aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. And item number 7.
Okay, item number 7, we first introduced this at the February 2nd meeting, and it was staff had proposed to City Council to consider several revenue-generating options for our COVID relief. And one of them was to have a ballot measure for a temporary increase on the TOT, which is our transient occupancy tax, which affects our hotels and our short-term vacation rentals. Reallocating the TOT distribution and increasing the sales tax. Staff was directed at that meeting, and we will be coming back after developing an ordinance and election documents to place a measure to increase the sales tax by 0.25% on a future election. And at that time, I had given you 2 dates, November 2nd and March 1st, and I was totally forgetting that we already changed that, and sorry, the council had adopted that resolution, which we sent to the state, that we moved out our election date to align with the state, and so now that election is actually on June 7th. We had reached out to the county just to see how much it would cost to have a special election in November, and I thought the cost was too high, so I think it's best for us to wait till June. They gave us a quota of $19,000, and I suggest that we wait, and I'll bring that back to you for you to make that decision, but that will be my recommendation. So tonight before you, also, I apologize, we were directed to come back with different versions. If it was a 1% increase, a 2% increase, or a 3% increase, or if we reduce the percentage that went to the chamber. So I'm just going to go over a few points on a PowerPoint.
Okay.
And in the staff report, there were 4 options given to the City Council. So just as a refresher, our current rate for our TOT is 12%, and in 2019 we are using these figures because that was pre-COVID, and the TOT collected that year was 5.3 million. The allocation to the chamber is 22%, and their allocated amount was almost 1.2. So the remaining portion that went into our general fund was $4,180,000. Option A that I listed on the staff report, if we increased it by 1%, based on that amount that would go into the general fund would be $450,000. I'm sorry, that we would receive the 22% that goes to the chamber would be $99,000, and so the total amount that goes to the city would be $351,000. And in 10 years, I have those figures up there of how much we would have in our coffers. After 10 years just for the city, after providing the 22% to the chamber, it would be 3.5 million.
And us getting the whole 1%. Correct?
No, the whole 1% mayor would be the 4.5.
Okay.
But if we gave the 22% to the chamber after 10 years, they would have almost $1 million.
Okay.
Option B is if we increased it by 2%, so the total available to the general fund is 900,000. If we give the percentage to the tourism authority, it would be 198,000, and then the city would receive would be 702,000. That's at 2%, and then at the bottom has what our 10-year goal would be, and totally to the city, less the allocation to the tourism authority would be 7 million. Option C is a 3%, and you can see the figures up there of what that would be. So after 10 years, it would be 10.5 million. That's after the tourism authority received their portion, and they would receive almost $3 million. And this is just a little table outlining it, so you can see it better. Next one, Michael. And option D was decreasing the allocation to the tourism authority. We went by 1%, 2%, and 3%. I do have a correction in our staff report at the very bottom in the net change at 1%. My staff report, I think I had 36,000, and I just caught it tonight, and it's 53,000 minus. Michael, would you put that back up there? Yeah, in case they want to. So tonight, staff is looking for direction and how you would like to move forward.
I'm sorry, can you put that back up on the screen for a second?
The D's option, Cindy?
Yeah, and I don't,
that's on page 3 of your staff report too.
Oh, I got it, never mind, thank you.
Staff is recommending the 1% that remains totally with the city.
How about if I make a motion to start the conversation? Does that sound good?
Make a motion
So
to
I'll
what?
make the motion to do a 1% increase over 10 years with the full 1% going to the city. And meaning the full 450,000 per year estimated general fund would be going to the city. And to leave the chamber's current allocation for the remaining 12% at the same percentage level that it's at now.
And would you also add to that, develop an ordinance to increase the sales tax as well?
Yes, and also with the agreement to increase the sales tax as previously discussed.
Do we need to do that separately, or can they be?
No,
together?
I feel like we
Maybe on
already
the same.
received that direction, and then you'll formally vote on that at another meeting.
Okay. I second that.
Is there other discussion?
Can I just ask Matt Baker, how difficult is it to, I mean, it seems like it would not be that difficult to do the accounting for the allocation with the 22% not going to the chamber?
Here he comes, Cindy.
I mean, we would probably make some changes to our current template, but other than that, I don't anticipate, it being all that difficult to account for those two things separately. We've kind of internally discussed it within the finance department, so there might be some changes we would make to the reporting form, but I don't anticipate, and it's nothing we can't handle in finance.
Okay, that was my only question. I just want to say, just for the public record, that I'm not in favor of changing the allocation. I think that the TOT tax, whatever that percentage is, whether it's 12, 13, 14, 15%, that the 22% allocation should go to the chamber. I'm not going to withhold the vote for that. Lisa, I respect your motion, and Michael, your second, but I just wanted it to be known that I was not in favor of withholding from the chamber.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Cindy, and I would normally be in the same boat as well, but I also want us to present a ballot measure that will pass and have some concerns that the community may not vote to pass if it includes that, unfortunately. So I fully understand and appreciate that.
And my concern, I mean, if I thought we could go for 2%, I think I would, because last budget meeting, how much money are we going to have the end of June? $200,000. If this doesn't go on the ballot until June, we're kind of that much more behind the ball. I mean, it might be tough if we could, I don't know, if we could do it in November. I think that would be good. My concern is, though, like you said, Lisa, I would like to see this be a grassroots to get this done, because if it has to pass by 66%, if the city puts it on the ballot, I would much rather some business people and private people say, let's do this, so then we only have to pass it by 50% plus one. And I don't know if we know people out there, I've talked to a few, if we know some people that would, do that to ensure that it does pass. I mean, this has to pass for us. I don't know, that's my...
I think one of the concerns that we need to take into consideration is this now, based on what Denise said, we're looking at June of 2022. That's, 15 months away, and there's a lot of other tax increases that may come into play between now and then. So, I think we have more conversation coming for sure.
To maybe push it to November, look at November.
Right, that would definitely be up to the council to make that decision. That 19,000 had just scared me, and I know our end goal would outweigh all that, but
yes,
that's your decision.
Okay, Denise, and that was going to be my question. That $19,000 we spend up front, what does that really mean in that extra 6 or 7 months of revenue generation? Because maybe by then cruise ships will be coming in and but then it's still the winter. It's December, January, February, March. So anyway, so we can have that November
ma'am.
conversation as well.
And right now, we're just voting to actually do it, correct? We're not setting a date?
You are not setting a date, and this is not a formal, this is just direction to the council,
Right.
to staff to bring it back for a formal motion.
So if there's no, looking at the four of you, there's no, I can see you all so clearly. There's no interest in 2% to the city? Totally?
I mean, honestly, I would love to write something that allows us to incrementally increase the TOT over the next 5 to 10 years to get it where it really should be. But I also know that we're dealing with a pandemic, people that are potentially either having more money because of unemployment or significantly less because of losing jobs and money and everything else. And I don't know that, I don't know if a 2 or 3% would pass. I was hoping to bring back those numbers to look at for us, just to say this is the potential we have. But I also know that we need to get, whether it's 50% by a community-led effort or 67% by what we're doing right now, the chances of getting that with a higher percentage may not be as easy to do with that number. So I don't know. I'm not sure where you guys are at on that. But I would rather hedge our bets on a 1% that may get passed easily and help fill the bucket back up and hope for better things and plan for better things than shoot the moon and end up with an empty bucket.
Yeah, okay.
And I just want to point out that the last time that the TOT was raised was 17 years ago. So this is not the end of the world. It helps this community continue to provide services. So just to put that out there, that the last time it was raised was 17 years ago.
Right.
And I respect that. We're looking at 4 separate tax type fee increases in a year and a half. And, 1% kind of spreading all of these increases around. For me, the 0.25% for the sales tax is an absolute no-brainer. We have to do that. I don't want to lose that to county or others, because we desperately need that. But we've had some other tax increases, and I don't want to I'm really not comfortable with all the different taxes over a period of a year and a half. I mean, I know we've made significant cuts in our budget. I think there's more that we can do. I think as we go into the budget discussions, we all have some ideas that we want to share, but that's my concern for going any higher. Is I don't want to be a year down the road and say we've put this tax in place, we've put that tax in place, we've added this to the boat, we've increased the sales tax. I mean, at a certain point, enough is enough. So I will agree to put the 1% on the ballot, but I would not, unfortunately, be in favor of 2%.
Okay. Yesenia, do you have any comments?
I believe I'm on the same boat as Lisa. I don't want to, although of course we all want the higher rate, but I don't think it would pass. And I would rather stick with the 1% and have greater chances of that passing.
Alrighty. I think we've all spoken on the matter. So, do you have direction?
Any public comment?
Oh, public comment. I'm sorry, Michael.
I've not received any public comment.
Okay, so it looks like, okay, we're not going to talk the date. We're talking about the 1%, all of it going towards the city and the sales tax. Okay, and we already voted? We need to vote?
We need to vote.
Okay. Okay, Denise, roll call, please.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Ponce?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Cassidy?
Aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. Well, what's really been interesting through all this COVID stuff is we've not had any, I forgot what they're called, and we go in the back room.
A closed session?
We haven't had any closed
Closed
sessions
sessions.
in a year.
Mayor Marshall, we
I think we will next meeting.
And so the date of our shutdown was March 19th, is that correct? Okay, so look at how close we are coming on to a year with all of this, folks.
I pointed out to somebody, and she made fun of me. The last time I was off the island was February 9th of 2020.
Wow.
March 8th
March
of
8th?
2020.
Wow. Yeah, well, I've been off a couple of times. All righty, well, if there's no other business, we want to say goodnight to Tony. And
Good night, Tony.
And meeting is adjourned.
Good night, Tony.